The afternoon sun's rays streamed through the mansion's tall windows, bathing the living room in a golden light that contrasted with the coldness of the space. Emma sat on the sofa, distracted by the novel she was trying to read, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts often returned to Jake, the man she loved, and the dreams they shared of a simple, happy life, far from her family's stifling expectations. But that peaceful moment was interrupted when the heavy doors of the room burst open with a snap. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The sound of her father Richard's firm footsteps always signaled something serious. And today there was something different in his walk, something dark that made Emma's stomach turn with nervousness. Richard entered the room with the familiar, serious expression she knew all too well. He wore his usual expensive suit, impeccable, as if always ready for a business meeting, even at home. He was a middle-aged man, his sharp features marked by time and the sacrifices he always claimed to have made for the family. But Emma was never sure if he meant sacrifices to keep the family name intact or to crush any hope she had of living life her own way. "We need to talk," he said in a dry, direct tone, wasting no time. Emma's body stiffened. She knew this wasn't a casual conversation. When her father used that tone, it usually meant something serious, and never good, was coming. She set the book aside, swallowed hard, and looked at him, trying to stay calm. But the feeling that something terrible was about to happen consumed her. "What do you want to talk about, Dad?" Her voice came out soft, almost hesitant, as if she feared the answer. Richard slowly approached and sat in the leather chair next to the fireplace. He crossed his legs and looked directly into Emma's eyes, his gaze dark and cold like two icy stones. "You're going to get married, Emma. It's the only way to save this family." Those words hit her like a direct blow to the heart. Emma's jaw dropped, and for a moment she couldn't process what she had just heard. It was as if time had stopped, as if the world around her had lost its meaning. The air became heavy, hard to breathe. You're joking?" She finally managed to stammer, her voice trembling. "Me? Marry? Who?" Richard's face remained unreadable. He didn't have time for jokes or long explanations. He had always been that way, efficient, straight to the point. For him, everything in life was a transaction, an exchange of value. With Henry Blackwood, he continued, his tone leaving no room for debate. An influential businessman, owner of one of the largest hotel chains in the country, and a billionaire. He's willing to invest whatever it takes to save our company, but in return, he wants a young wife who can be his companion at events and business trips. Emma almost laughed at how absurd the proposal sounded. Henry Blackwood? She barely knew him, except for the stories she had heard at formal dinners. He was much older, almost her father's age, and known for his cold and ruthless behavior. A marriage? To him? It was an impossible, grotesque idea. "Dad, you're telling me you want me to marry a man I hardly know? A man I don't love? That's insane." Emma's voice began to rise, panic growing inside her. Richard raised an eyebrow, as if tired of dealing with his daughter's emotional reactions. To him, emotions were just obstacles on the road to success. "You don't understand, Emma," he began, his voice becoming more severe. "Our family's company is on the brink of collapse. Years of bad luck in business, unstable markets, we're sinking. If we don't do something now, we'll lose everything. And Henry Blackwood is our only chance of survival. He wants you as his wife, and you will be." Emma felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Everything she knew, everything she dreamed of, was crumbling. Her father wanted her to marry a man she didn't love, just to save the company. Her dreams of freedom, of love with Jake, were being ripped away from her as if they meant nothing. And what about Jake? The words slipped from her lips before she could stop herself. "What about the man I love, Dad? Did you expect me to just forget him?" Richard scoffed, his patience clearly running thin. "Jake is irrelevant. He's a mechanic, Emma, a man with no ambition, no future. He could never give you the life you deserve or keep this family standing. I'm trying to protect you. This marriage is the only way." Anger rose inside Emma like an uncontrolled flame. "Protect me? Forcing me to marry a man I don't love is protecting me?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "You think you know what's best for you, but you don't. Jake can't offer you what Henry can. This marriage is an alliance, not about love." Emma felt tears welling up, but she held them back. She wouldn't give her father the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "So you're willing to sell me for money? Like I'm just a piece in a business deal?" "I'm securing your future," Richard corrected, standing abruptly, the coldness in his eyes intensifying. "You have until the end of the month to get ready. The wedding will happen soon. Henry is already taking care of the details." He walked toward the door without looking back, leaving Emma alone in a now cold and desolate room. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty hallways, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emma was frozen, as if her body was trapped by invisible chains. This wasn't the man who had raised her with love and care. The man she knew had disappeared, replaced by someone who saw her only as a bargaining chip. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. All she could do was wonder how her life had come to this point. And now, how could she tell Jake? How could she tell him that their love, their plans for the future, were being destroyed by a decision she had no control over? Fear and despair consumed her. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't let this happen without a fight. The morning air was thick, almost suffocating, despite the light breeze that swayed the leaves outside. The cloudy sky reflected the whirlwind of emotions inside Emma. She hadn't slept all night, tossing and turning in bed, lost in her thoughts, and her father Richard's words, which echoed relentlessly in her mind. Marriage. To Henry Blackwood. The idea was simply absurd, but to Richard it seemed like the solution to all their problems. Sitting at the breakfast table, she watched her father read the newspaper as if nothing had happened. The silence between them was deafening. The sound of cutlery against plates was the only thing filling the void in the room. Each bite felt heavier, as if she was swallowing her own fate. Emma could barely breathe from the anxiety. With every passing second, she felt as if she was being suffocated. She couldn't stay in that house, not with the man who was turning her into a bargaining chip. Suddenly, her chair scraped loudly as she stood up, not bothering to offer any explanation. Richard didn't even look up from his newspaper. She rushed out, her breath heavy. Her feet almost ran across the streets, damp from the morning drizzle. The urgency to find Jake, her true love, grew with each step. He was her only anchor, the only one who could give her strength when everything seemed to be falling apart. She needed to see him, she needed comfort, and more than anything, she needed a way out. Let's play a little trick on those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Comment Brigadero in the comments, and only those who got this far will get it. Now, let's continue with the story. When she arrived at the workshop where Jake worked, the noise of tools and the smell of oil mixed with metal hit her like a punch. But none of that mattered. She saw him, covered in grease, focused on adjusting the engine of an old car. Her eyes filled with tears before she could even say a word. "Jake!" Her voice came out choked, loud enough to rise above the noise of the workshop. Jake quickly lifted his head, his blue eyes widening when he saw her there. He took off his work gloves, wiping his hands on an old, dirty cloth, and rushed towards her. "Emma, what happened?" he asked, clearly worried. "You're crying." Emma grabbed his arm and pulled him outside the workshop, away from anyone who might hear. When they finally stopped in an empty alley, she let go of his hands, feeling like she was carrying a bomb about to explode. "Jake, my father, he wants me to get married," she said, almost out of breath. Her words came out rushed, filled with desperation, as if saying them quickly would somehow lessen their weight. Jake frowned, confused. "Married? To whom? Why?" "To Henry Blackwood." The name left her lips like poison, and Jake's face instantly darkened. He's going to save my family's company, and in return, my father wants me to marry him." Fury burned in Jake's eyes, and he stepped back, as if he needed space to process it all. "This is ridiculous, Emma. You're not going to marry a man you don't love. Not for your father, not for some company." Emma shook her head, trying to hold back the tears. "I don't know what to do. My father said we'll lose everything if I don't go through with it. He thinks it's the right thing to do, that it'll save the family, save the company. But I can't, Jake. I can't even imagine marrying anyone but you." Jake stepped forward, holding her face in his hands, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "Then don't do it, Emma. We can run away. We can leave this all behind. Start fresh somewhere new. I don't care about the money or your father's company. I just want you. And I know you love me, so why stay in this nightmare? She stared at him, desperately wishing things could be that simple. The idea of running away with Jake, leaving behind this suffocating life, seemed like the perfect solution. But something deeper held her back. Something her father had planted in her since she was a child. The duty to keep the family intact, to be the obedient daughter, to sacrifice her desires for others. Jake, what if my father's right? What if this is all my fault? If I don't marry, he'll lose everything. We'll lose everything. I can't just turn my back and pretend this won't destroy us. Jake let out a heavy, frustrated sigh. He pulled Emma closer, wrapping her in a tight embrace. No, Emma. What will destroy you is marrying a man you don't love, living a life that isn't yours. Don't do this for him. You need to do what's right for you. Emma's heart broke a little more with each word from Jake. He was right. She knew that. But it was hard to break free from the chains her father had built around her throughout her life. Jake's hands gently stroked her hair, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to rest in his arms. The world felt a little lighter with him there, but she knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't just run away right now. I need to think, she said, her voice weak. I can't make this decision now. I need time. Jake looked at her with pain in his eyes but nodded. I'll be here, waiting for you. But Emma, please, don't let your father take away your happiness. You deserve to live the life you want, not the one he wants for you. She stepped away slowly, feeling Jake's gaze on her, every step weighing her down, as if she was leaving behind the only things still holding her together. When she finally left the alley and began walking back, the despair returned, filling her chest. Time was running out, and more, the marriage to Henry Blackwood seemed like a sentence she couldn't escape. The days that followed were full of uncertainty and unbearable tension. Emma avoided her father whenever possible, trying to find any trace of strength to deal with the situation. She still couldn't accept that her life was being negotiated like a mere asset, but the weight of responsibility she felt for her family grew heavier each day. The phone rang that afternoon, breaking the heavy silence in the mansion. Alice, the housekeeper, answered and handed the phone to Emma with a sympathetic look that only made things harder. "It's for you, miss," she said, her voice soft and concerned. Emma brought the phone to her ear, her heart already heavy, knowing that the voice on the other end would bring yet another wave of suffering. "Emma, dear," Richard's voice was as firm as always. "Henry is on his way to our house. He'd like to have dinner with you tonight. It's time you two got to know each other better." Emma's stomach churned. The thought of being in the same room as Henry, that distant, cold man who was now her arranged fiancé, made her feel sick. But she knew refusing wasn't an option, and as much as she despised the situation, she was feeling more trapped with every passing day. "Yes, father," she replied, her voice heavy with resigned exhaustion. "I'll be ready." The hours before dinner were spent in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. The heavy makeup, the perfectly styled hair, the expensive dress she would never have chosen for herself. Emma already felt like an exhibition piece, being carefully prepared for a future that wasn't hers. The sound of tires on the driveway made her heart race. Henry Blackwood had arrived. She walked down the stairs slowly, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted to face Henry with all the anger and frustration she had been holding back. Another part, the one her father had nurtured for years, felt she should be polite, follow the expectations, and do what was expected of her. When she entered the dining room, Henry was there, talking casually with Richard. He turned when he saw her, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes curled his lips. Henry was just as she remembered, tall, lean, with graying hair and a stern expression, like someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders but didn't care much about it. There was a coldness in his gaze, a calculation that made her uncomfortable. "Emma," he said, extending his hand to her with the cordiality of a businessman closing a deal. "It's a pleasure to see you again." She shook his hand, feeling the firmness and rigidity of his grip. "Likewise, Mr. Blackwood. Please call me Henry." He gave a smile that felt more like a formality than any real expression of warmth. The conversation during dinner was superficial and unsettling. Richard seemed excited, talking about business, the future, the opportunities this union would bring to both families. Henry listened with an air of indifference, only responding when necessary, as if he already knew everything was settled. To him, Emma wasn't a person with dreams and desires. She was just another part of the deal. As the dinner went on, Emma could barely touch her food. Her mind wandered, and she felt the tension tighten in her chest every time Henry's eyes fell on her. There was something in his gaze, something that made her want to run as far away as possible. He wasn't just cold. There was an emptiness in his eyes, as if he had long ago left behind any trace of humanity. When the meal ended, Henry suggested they talk alone. Emma glanced at Richard, hoping for some sign that this wasn't necessary, but her father's look only reinforced the message that she needed to go along with it. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her heart raced. They walked out to the garden, where the night breeze softly rustled the leaves. The silence between them was heavy, but Henry seemed comfortable with it. He walked beside her, with his hands clasped behind his back, staring up at the stars with a distant air. "You seem hesitant, Emma," he finally said, without looking at her. "This is all very sudden for me," she replied, unsure of how to express herself. "I didn't expect my life to take this direction." Henry nodded slowly, as if he had expected that response. "I understand, but you see, this marriage isn't just about you or me. It's about our families, our legacy. You're not just marrying me, you're securing your family's future." Frustration bubbled inside Emma. He sounded just like her father, always reducing her life to a family duty. She stopped walking and looked at him with determination. "I'm not sure this is what I want, Henry. I don't know if I'm the right person for you." He finally turned his face to look at her, and for the first time, Emma saw a slight change in his expression. A dark glint passed through his eyes, something that made her shudder. "This isn't about wanting, Emma," he said, his voice low and controlled. "It's already decided. There's no turning back." The knot in Emma's stomach tightened. The conversation was over. She knew that for Henry, this wasn't a matter of choice. He was a man who always got what he wanted, and now he wanted her as part of his empire. As she returned inside, the sense of suffocation felt more intense than ever. With each step, the dark future loomed closer, and with it the certainty that this marriage wasn't just a financial decision. It was a prison. That night, after the unsettling dinner with Henry, Emma felt more lost than ever. The weight of reality was crushing her, and her thoughts spiraled out of control. Everything seemed to be moving too fast beyond her control, like an avalanche about to bury her. The warmth of her dimly lit room didn't comfort her. On the contrary, it felt stifling, echoing her anxieties and fears. She stared at her phone for long minutes, battling the urge to call Jake. She knew he needed to know about Henry's visit, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the questions that would follow. After a few seconds of hesitation, she finally dialed his number. "Emma?" Jake's voice came through on the other end, calm but with a hint of worry. "Is everything okay? You sound different." "Jake, I need to see you," Emma whispered, her throat tight. "Now, I can't wait." There was a pause on the other end, and then Jake replied, "I'm on my way." Half an hour later, they were sitting on a bench in a quiet park, far from the curious eyes of anyone who might recognize them. The night was cold, but Emma barely felt the temperature. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to fill all her senses. Jake watched her closely, trying to understand what was going on. He knew something had changed, and the anxiety in his chest was palpable. "He came tonight," Emma began without preamble, her voice trembling and broken. "Henry Blackwood, my father, he's arranging everything. The dinner, it was a disaster. I don't know what to do, Jake. I feel trapped, and I can't see a way out." Jake took a deep breath, his face hardening. "Did you talk to him? Did you try to tell him you don't want this?" Emma shook her head, biting her lip. "I did, but Henry isn't the kind of person who takes no for an answer. He's already decided, Jake. To him, this is just another business deal, another agreement. I'm just a part of it." Jake clenched his fists, his frustration evident. He had always felt powerless against the influence Richard had over Emma, but now it felt like a prison with no escape. "This is insane, Emma. They can't force you into this. You're a person, not an object." She wanted to believe his words, wanted to hold on to the idea that there was still a choice. But the more she tried to convince herself, the heavier the weight of responsibility felt on her shoulders. It wasn't just her future at stake. It was her family's legacy, her father's hard work, the company that supported hundreds of employees. She knew what was on the line, but the thought of leaving Jake to live with a man she didn't love tore her apart. "Jake, if I marry him, my family doesn't lose everything," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can bear the weight of watching my family fall apart. I feel so torn." Jake stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth, clearly struggling to control his anger. He turned to her, his eyes filled with pain and disbelief. "And what about us, Emma? What about all the plans we made? The future we dreamed of together? Are you willing to throw that all away for a debt that isn't yours?" His words hit Emma like a slap. She knew Jake was right, that the pressure from her father was almost unbearable. Her heart was shattered, torn between her duty to her family and her love for Jake. "I don't want to lose you, Jake," she whispered, looking down at the ground. "But what do I do? How can I just run away and let everything fall apart? My family has always depended on me. My mother always taught me that family comes first." Jake moved closer again, taking her hands in his. "Emma, your mother would never have wanted this for you. She would never have wanted you to sacrifice your happiness for something so empty. You're telling me you're willing to spend the rest of your life miserable with a man you don't even know, just to save something that isn't even your fault." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back. The knot in her throat was suffocating. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this." Jake pulled her into a tight embrace. "Then we run away. Let's leave, Emma. We can start fresh, far from your father, far from Henry. We don't need the money, the company. All we need is each other." The idea of running away felt like a fantasy, something unreachable. But for a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to imagine it. She and Jake, living in a small house somewhere far away, free from the chains of family and business. A simple life, but one filled with love and freedom. That vision was sweet and almost irresistible, but soon reality came crashing down, like a cold, relentless wave. "Jake, I don't know if I can," she whispered, her eyes closing as tears finally escaped. "I don't know if I can leave it all behind." Jake stepped back slowly, his heart heavy. He wanted to fight for her, wanted to convince her that their love was enough. But he knew the final decision was hers. All he could do was wait and hope that Emma would choose love over duty. "I love you, Emma," he said softly, "and I'll always be here waiting if you decide your future is with me." Emma looked at him, her heart broken, unsure of what to say. She knew she needed to make a decision soon, but at that moment, the pain and confusion overwhelmed her completely. All she knew was that the choice she made would change her life forever. Days passed, and the pressure on Emma only grew. The wedding was set, and Henry was already acting as if her life was just another piece on his chessboard. More and more, she felt like a prisoner, trapped by a decision that wasn't hers, but now seemed inescapable. Jake's face continued to haunt her thoughts, yet she couldn't see a clear path for the two of them. The fear of the unknown and her family responsibilities were suffocating her. As much as she wanted to run away with Jake, the weight of abandoning her family and the legacy her mother cherished kept her paralyzed. One afternoon, while strolling through the mansion's gardens in a desperate attempt to escape the chaos in her mind, Emma overheard a conversation that caught her attention. Alice, the housekeeper, was speaking on the phone in a low, worried voice. Curious, Emma hid behind a nearby tree and focused on Alice's words, her mind racing to piece things together. "Yes, I know. Henry Blackwood has a terrible reputation, but Mr. Richard thinks he's doing what's best for the family. He doesn't see what's really behind this deal. I fear that by the time he finds out, it'll be too late. He's not the man everyone thinks he is." Emma's heart pounded. Henry, a dangerous man? Her mind spun, recalling every meeting, every word exchanged with him. The emptiness in his eyes, the cold, calculating way he treated everything like a mere transaction. Something about him had always felt wrong, as if she were standing before a predator. Waiting for Alice to finish her call, Emma finally decided to confront her. When the housekeeper hung up, Emma stepped out from behind the tree and walked toward her, her eyes full of determination. "Alice, what did you mean by that? What do you know about Henry?" Alice looked startled, as if she had been caught red-handed. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she hesitated to speak. "Miss Emma, I shouldn't have said anything. I didn't want to worry you." "Please, Alice," Emma pleaded, her voice thick with urgency. "If you know something I need to know, my life depends on it." The housekeeper glanced around, making sure no one else was nearby. Then she took a deep breath and moved closer to Emma, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I've heard rumors about Mr. Blackwood. For years he's been buying and destroying companies like your father's. He lures families into deals, and once the contract is signed, he leaves them on the brink of bankruptcy. All he wants is complete control." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "Are you saying he's trying to destroy my father's company?" Alice nodded, her expression grim. "That's what it seems like. He has a long list of families who were ruined by his hands. And from what I've heard, he won't stop until he takes everything from you." Emma's world began to collapse. Everything her father was trying to save, the company, the family's legacy, was on the verge of falling apart. And by agreeing to the marriage, she was being used as a pawn in this twisted game. What Henry really wanted wasn't just a wife. He wanted total control over her family's fortune. Without wasting another second, Emma ran inside the house. Her heart was racing, and panic surged through her veins like poison. She needed to speak with her father immediately. He was being manipulated, and if they didn't act quickly, they would lose everything. She found Richard in his office, buried in documents and spreadsheets, as usual. Her father barely looked at her when she entered, but Emma could no longer wait. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with nervousness and urgency. Richard glanced up briefly, frowning when he saw the distressed look on his daughter's face. "Not now, Emma. I'm busy with the wedding preparations and the financial agreements. Everything has to be perfect." "You don't understand," Emma insisted, her voice rising a bit. "Henry Blackwood is deceiving us. He doesn't want to save the company, Dad. He wants to destroy it. He's done this to other families before. He's using this marriage to take control of everything." Richard paused, blinking as if Emma's words took a moment to register. "What are you talking about?" "I heard it from Alice. She knows of other cases. Henry gets involved with families, signs contracts, and then drives them into bankruptcy. He's using us. Dad, if I marry him, we'll lose everything." Richard's face slowly changed from disbelief to anger. "That's ridiculous, Emma. You're listening to rumors, gossip. Henry is a respected businessman. He's already promised to help us, and you're telling me all of this is a lie? I know it sounds crazy, but you need to listen. Something's wrong. He doesn't care about our family. He cares about control. Look at the way he acts, Dad. He treats us like pieces in a game." Richard stood up, anger growing on his face. "You're being influenced by your emotions, Emma. This is all just fear of facing reality. This marriage is our only chance to survive." "Survive what?" Emma burst out, tears streaming down her face. "A life of control? A life where all that matters are numbers and deals? I'm your daughter, Dad. Please look beyond the business for just a moment and see what's happening." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard looked at Emma, but it wasn't the look of a father concerned for his daughter's well-being. It was the look of a man who for years had let himself be consumed by business and pride, and now found himself at an emotional crossroads. "If you don't marry Henry," he finally said, his voice cold and controlled, "we will lose everything, our reputation, our fortune, our company. And that will be your responsibility." Emma swallowed hard, feeling utterly defeated. Her father wouldn't listen. He was blinded by his own ambition, unable to see the looming danger. She left the office without another word, tears flowing freely down her face. She knew now that there was only one person who could help her. She needed Jake. Night had fallen over the city, bringing with it a sense of urgency that Emma had never felt so strongly before. After the conversation with her father, she knew she was completely alone in that house. No one seemed willing to listen to her. No one seemed to understand the burden she carried. Her father was trapped in his world of numbers and deals, and now the only person she could trust was Jake. Emma hurried out of the mansion, the cold wind biting at her skin as she ran through the nearly deserted streets toward the garage where Jake worked. The path, which once seemed endless, now felt shorter, as if fate itself was pushing her toward the decision she needed to make. When she arrived at the garage, Jake was there, alone as usual, working on a car that looked as worn out as Emma's hopes. He looked up as she entered, and the expression on his face changed from surprise to immediate concern. There was something different in her eyes that night, something that told him time was running out. "Emma?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag and quickly walking toward her. "What happened? Why are you like this?" Emma stood in front of him, breathless, trying to find the right words, but all that came out was a rush of emotions. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's going to be fine, because it's not. Henry, he's going to destroy my family. Everything my father worked his whole life to build will disappear." Jake frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Emma ran her hands through her hair, exasperated, trying to control the rising panic inside her. "Henry is using us. He's taking advantage of my father's desperation to manipulate us. He's done this to other families before. He promises to save companies, but in the end, he destroys them. If I marry him, it'll be the end of everything." Jake stayed silent for a moment, trying to process the gravity of her words. He had always sensed something dark about Henry, but he never imagined it went this deep. "Emma, you can't let this happen. You can't sacrifice yourself because of your father." Emma looked at him, desperate. "But if I don't marry Henry, my father will lose everything. He's completely blinded by this deal. He doesn't see the danger. I'm the only thing standing between our family and complete ruin." Jake gripped her hands firmly, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. "And what will happen to you, Emma? Are you going to spend the rest of your life tied to a man you don't love? Living a lie just to save your family's business?" She felt the tears welling up, but held them back, trying to keep her composure. "I don't know what to do. I feel so torn. If I run, I leave my father at Henry's mercy. If I stay, I destroy myself." Jake took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "You already know what you need to do, Emma. Running away is the only option. We can't fight someone like Henry by playing his game. But we can escape. We can start a new life far from here. I'll go with you, Emma. Wherever you want to go, I'll be by your side." His words felt like a balm to Emma's soul, but at the same time, they were terrifying. Run away? Leave behind everything she knew, everything her mother had fought to preserve? And her father? He would never forgive her, and he might never recover financially. But on the other hand, if she stayed, her own soul would be destroyed. "Jake, what if I'm being selfish by choosing this? What if, in the end, I destroy everything anyway?" Jake shook his head slowly, his eyes softening as he pulled her closer. "Loving someone is never selfish, Emma. What's selfish is giving up your life for someone else's sake. You have to think about yourself, about what makes you happy. Running away isn't weakness. Running is your only chance to be free." Those words echoed in Emma's mind. Be free. The thought of finally breaking free from the oppression, from the chains of expectations her father had placed on her all her life, was both terrifying and tempting. For the first time, the idea of escape seemed like a real solution, a way to reclaim her own life. "When?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake looked into her eyes, his determination unwavering. "Tonight. We don't have any time to waste. Henry's going to realize something's wrong, and your father won't accept your decision easily. We need to leave now, before it's too late." Emma glanced around, the weight of the decision pressing down on her completely. She knew that once she crossed that line, there would be no turning back. Running away meant cutting all ties, leaving the past behind, and stepping into an uncertain future. But for the first time, she felt she might have a chance to make a choice for herself. She nodded, resolute. "Let's go." With a backpack holding only the essentials, Emma followed Jake out of the city, heading into the unknown. The sound of the tires on the pavement echoed in her mind, each passing mile taking her further from the prison that had been her old life. Yet the uncertainty and fear lingered. She knew Henry and her father wouldn't give up easily. Running away was just the first step, but the real challenge was still ahead. As she stared out the car window, the city lights fading into the horizon, Emma felt a mixture of sadness and relief. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, a sense of freedom filled her. Yes, she was running, but she was also finally breaking free. The days following Emma and Jake's escape were filled with tension and uncertainty. They drove far without a clear destination, just trying to put as much distance between them and the city as possible. Emma knew her father must have been desperate by now, and that Henry wouldn't give up easily. But for a brief moment, while they were on the road, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to start over. But reality was never far behind. The threat loomed over them like a shadow. And one morning, when they had finally settled in a small town up north, Emma's worst fears came true. Her father found them. It was early in the morning when the door of the small inn where they were staying was pounded on loudly. Emma knew who it was before she even opened it. When the door swung open, there stood Richard, his face hard and filled with anger, but also deep disappointment. Beside him, 2 security guards stared intently at Jake, who stood by Emma's side, ready to step in if needed. "Emma, we need to talk." Now, Richard's voice was low, controlled, but full of an unshakable authority. She looked at Jake, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'll be right here, no matter what he says." Emma followed her father outside, where the cold, cloudy morning made the atmosphere even more somber. They walked in silence to a small, secluded area, away from the curious eyes of the other guests. Richard looked exhausted, but there was a fire of fury burning in his eyes. "I can't believe you did this, Emma. Running away? With that boy? You're destroying everything I've worked my whole life for." Emma felt her chest tighten, but for the first time in her life she was ready to fight. "I couldn't do it, Dad. I couldn't marry Henry. He doesn't want to help us. He wants to destroy us, and you're so blinded by money that you can't even see it." Richard shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "Those are lies, Emma. Gossip. Henry is a respectable businessman. He offered us a way out, and you threw it all away for some romantic fantasy with a boy who will never give you anything but heartache." Emma took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This isn't a fantasy. This is real. Jake is the only one who truly cares about me. He's never treated me like a bargaining chip, never made me feel like my life was just a contract." Richard stepped closer, his voice lowering and becoming more threatening. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Do you think you know what love is? Love doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't keep your family's name clean. You'll destroy everything if you keep going down this path." Emma looked him in the eye, feeling tears form but holding them back. "Dad, I can't live my life just to support your ambitions. I need to live for myself. I tried to do what you wanted, but I can't. I won't marry Henry." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Richard stood there, looking at Emma as if he no longer recognized her. For the first time, it seemed he realized she was no longer the obedient daughter he had always controlled. "If you go through with this," he said slowly, "you will be disinherited. There will be nothing left for you. No part of this family, no part of this legacy. And if everything falls apart, it will be because of you." His words cut like knives, but Emma knew there was no other choice. "I accept that," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "But I won't sacrifice myself for something I don't believe in." Without another word, Richard turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing in the cold morning air, her heart broken but her resolve unshaken. She knew her life had just changed forever, but for the first time she felt in control of her own destiny. That afternoon, as Emma and Jake packed their bags, preparing to leave the inn and start over somewhere new, something unexpected happened. Emma's phone rang, and to her surprise, it was Henry Blackwood. "Emma," his voice was low but sharp, "you think you can just disappear? You think you can run away from me? Your father owes me, and if you think leaving like this will fix anything, you're very wrong." A chill ran down her spine. "I'm not going to marry you, Henry. And my father, he's already decided I'm not part of this anymore." Henry laughed, a cold, calculated laugh. "This isn't about your father. You were the most important part of this deal. And now, I'll make sure you pay for this. You know you can't run from me, don't you?" Fear gripped Emma, but she stayed calm. "I'm not coming back, Henry. Do whatever you want, but I won't be part of your game." "Then get ready for the consequences," he replied before hanging up. Emma stared at the phone for a moment, her hands trembling. Henry was far from giving up. He was more dangerous than she had imagined, and now his anger was fully directed at her. The marriage that should have happened with Henry had become the trigger for a much bigger battle. What had once been a simple transaction had now turned into a fight between freedom and power. Emma knew she was in a war, and running was just the first step. The final confrontation was coming, and this time she would have to fight not just for her freedom, but for everything she believed in. The tension in the air was palpable in the days following Henry's last call. Emma and Jake couldn't fully relax, even after moving to a more distant town. They knew Henry was a dangerous man, a manipulator who wouldn't accept defeat so easily. But Emma was determined not to back down, even if it meant facing the harshest consequences. In the new town, they tried to start a new life, but the feeling that they were being followed never went away. The nights were restless, and every strange noise put them on edge. Despite Emma's brave decision, Henry's shadow still loomed over them like an invisible but constant threat. One afternoon, as they walked through the town square, Emma received a message on her phone. It was from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, but her heart raced when she saw the contents. A photo of her and Jake, taken that same morning, accompanied by a short, direct message. "I know where you are." Emma felt the blood run cold in her veins. She knew exactly what that meant. Henry was hunting them, and now he knew precisely where they were. "Jake, we need to leave. Now," she said, gripping his arm tightly, panic evident in her voice. Jake looked at the message and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Let's get back to the hotel, grab our things, and get out before he finds us." The walk back was quick, but each step felt heavier than the last. When they reached the small hotel where they were staying, Emma's anxiety grew even stronger. They packed their things hastily, throwing everything into their bags while the sense of imminent danger intensified. But when they opened the door to leave, there stood Henry, blocking their path. "I told you it wouldn't be easy, Emma," he murmured, a cold smile on his face. "Did you really think you could run from me?" Emma's heart raced. She looked at Jake, trying to think of an escape, but she knew they were cornered. Henry wasn't alone. His security guards stood behind him, ready to stop any attempt at fleeing. Jake stepped forward, positioning himself between Emma and Henry. "You've already lost, Henry. Emma isn't going back to you." Henry laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Lost? I haven't lost anything, kid. I still control everything. And now, I just need Emma to fulfill the deal." Emma took a deep breath, trying to find strength. "I won't marry you, Henry. I'll never be your bargaining chip. Do whatever you want, but I won't give in." Henry's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emma saw his true nature. A man driven by greed and a thirst for power, willing to go to any lengths to get what he wanted. "If you think you can just run away, then you don't know me as well as you think," he said, stepping forward. "But I'll give you one last chance, Emma. Come back with me, and this nightmare ends. I don't go back on my promises. If you refuse, well, things will get much harder for you, and for your friend here." Jake clenched his fists, but Emma held him back, pleading with her eyes for him not to do anything rash. "I will never go back with you," Emma said, her voice steady despite her fear. "And you'll never get what you want." Henry stood silent for a moment, watching her with cold calculation. Then finally, he gave a cruel smile. "Very well. You've made your choice." Without warning, Henry signaled to his guards, and before Emma or Jake could react, they were forcefully pulled back into the room. Emma's world spun as she was thrown to the ground, and Henry slowly walked toward her, his threatening presence dominating the space. "You always had a choice, Emma. I offered you everything, but you chose this. Boy, now you'll pay the price." But before Henry could take another step, a loud knock echoed through the room. Everyone froze, surprised. Henry's eyes narrowed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. One of the guards went to the door, and when he opened it, he was greeted by a team of police officers who immediately stormed into the room. "Henry Blackwood, you're under arrest for extortion and contract manipulation," said one of the officers, as he handcuffed Henry, who was stunned, clearly caught off guard. Emma, still on the floor, looked at Jake, who was just as confused. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaky with relief and disbelief. Then Richard entered the room, accompanied by the officers. The look on his face was one of exhaustion, but also of relief. "I finally saw the truth, Emma," he said, walking toward his daughter. "Henry deceived me. Everything you said was true. I found evidence of all the contracts he's destroyed over the years. He wasn't going to save our company. He was going to ruin it." Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her father, who had once seemed so blinded by ambition and pride, was now standing there, finally seeing the truth. "I'm so sorry, daughter," Richard continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. And you were right all along." Henry, now in handcuffs, glared at Richard with hatred, but was quickly taken away by the police, while his security guards were also restrained. Emma stood up with Jake's help, feeling a mixture of relief and shock. Finally, the threat of Henry was over, but the emotional toll of everything that had happened still weighed heavily on her. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, holding her hand firmly. Emma nodded, though she knew it would take time to process everything that had happened. But in that moment, she knew the worst was behind her. She was free. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like her life truly belonged to her. Richard, on the other hand, seemed more humbled than ever. He knew he had almost lost everything, including his daughter, because of his blindness. But now, they had a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to start over. "Thank you," Emma whispered, looking at both Jake and her father, "for finally listening to me." And what did you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know. Your participation is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.